The letter came wrapped in oilcloth and smelled of coal smoke and whiskey, and it told Eliza Shelton exactly where to find the grave of the man who had murdered her father and stolen the gold that would have saved her family's ranch. It was the spring of 1879, and the Arizona Territory had not seen rain in 11 weeks. The grass on the Shelton Range had gone the color of old bone, and the well behind the ranch house had dropped so low that Eliza could hear her own voice echo when she lowered the bucket down. She stood on the porch that morning reading the letter for the third time, her hands trembling not from the heat, but from the years of grief that rose up in her chest like water finally breaking through a dam. The letter had come from a dying man named Amos Kettle, who had once ridden with the outlaw Jesse Malone, the same Jesse Malone who had ambushed her father's wagon on the Silver Bend Road 3 years before, put 2 bullets in Thomas Shelton's chest, and ridden off with $11,000 in gold coin that was meant to pay off the note on the ranch and keep 300 head of cattle from being sold at auction. Malone himself had not lived long after that. A posse had wounded him near the Dragoon foothills, and he had died of fever and infection in a played-out mining camp called Gallows Creek, where the few remaining residents had buried him in an unmarked grave on Boot Hill because no church would take his body and no family had claimed him. For 3 years, Eliza had believed the gold was gone forever, scattered or spent or buried so deep in the desert that no living soul would ever find it. But Amos Kettle, dying of consumption in a boarding house in Tucson, had written to her with a confession and a hand-drawn map, saying that Malone had buried the gold himself in the days before his death, in the one place he was certain no lawman would ever think to dig, beneath his own grave. Eliza folded the letter and pressed it against her chest as though she could hold her father's memory there, and she looked out over the dry, cracking land that had been in her family for 18 years, and she made up her mind before the sun had cleared the ridge. She would go to Gallows Creek. She would dig up that grave herself if she had to claw at the earth with her own 2 hands. And she would bring home what belonged to her family. The trouble was that Eliza Shelton had never been more than 30 miles from the ranch in her life, and Gallows Creek was nearly 90 miles across some of the most unforgiving country in the territory, past dry washes and rattlesnake flats and the kind of canyon country where a person could vanish and never be found. Her mother, Martha Shelton, had gone gray with worry the moment Eliza told her the plan and had begged her not to go alone. "You will need someone who knows that country," Martha had said, sitting at the kitchen table with her hands folded so tight her knuckles had gone white. "Someone who can shoot straight and think faster than trouble. I will not lose you the way I lost your father." And so it was that Eliza rode into the town of Silver Bend 2 days later, her father's old Colt Navy revolver strapped uncertainly to her hip, looking for a man everyone in 3 counties seemed to agree was the only one fool enough, or good enough, to take her where she needed to go. His name was Benjamin Fairchild. She found him first in the shadow of the livery stable, saddle over one arm, an easy grin already breaking across his sun-browned face, as though he had been expecting someone interesting to walk into his morning. He was tall, with the kind of build that came from years in a saddle rather than years at a desk, and he wore his gun low and comfortable, the mark of a man who had used it more than he liked to admit. He had been a Texas Ranger once, folks said, before something out on the nooses strip had put a weariness in his eyes that no amount of easy smiling could quite erase. "You are the one they call Fairchild," Eliza said, not quite a question. "I am the one who answers to it anyway." He set the saddle down on the fence rail and looked her over, not unkindly, but with the careful appraisal of a man used to sizing up trouble before it found him. "And you would be Thomas Shelton's girl. I heard about your father. Good man, bad way to go. I need a guide to Gallows Creek," she said, cutting past the sympathy she had grown tired of receiving over the years. "I can pay you when we return, not before. I do not have money now, but I will have it after, and it will be considerably more than you would earn breaking horses for the rest of the season. Something in his expression sharpened, curiosity replacing the easy charm. "That is a long way to travel on a promise, Miss Shelton. What exactly is waiting for you out there?" She hesitated only a moment before deciding that a man who would ride 90 miles with her deserved the truth. "The grave of Jesse Malone," she said. "And beneath it, the gold he stole from my father before he killed him." Benjamin Fairchild went very still. He was quiet long enough that Eliza thought he might laugh at her, or worse, turn and walk away as though she were simply a grieving woman chasing ghosts and rumors across the desert. But when he spoke, his voice had lost its easy drawl entirely. "I knew Jesse Malone," he said. "Rode against him twice when I wore a ranger's badge. He killed a deputy friend of mine outside Bisbee. I would take considerable satisfaction in seeing what is left of him dug up and his sins accounted for." He picked the saddle back up, slinging it over the fence rail with new purpose. "When do you want to leave?" "Today," Eliza said. "If you will come." "I will come," he said, "but you should know there is more than gold waiting at the end of that road. Malone did not ride alone, and not every man who followed him is dead. If word gets out that his grave is worth digging up, we will not be the only ones digging." She had not considered that, and the thought settled cold in her stomach even as the desert heat pressed down around them. But she thought of her mother's tired eyes, of the cattle they could not feed, of the bank notice that would come due before the summer's end, and she squared her shoulders. "Then we had best not waste daylight talking about it." They left Silver Bend within the hour, 2 horses and a pack mule loaded with water and hardtack, and a shovel Eliza had bought from the mercantile with the last of her coin. And behind them, the town shrank into a smear of dust and rooftops until the desert swallowed it whole. The first days of the journey passed in a rhythm of heat and silence, the kind of silence that comes when 2 strangers are testing the shape of each other's company. Benjamin rode ahead scouting the trail, circling back to check on her, offering brief instructions about where to find shade at midday or how to read the sky for a storm that might otherwise catch them unaware. Eliza found herself watching him more than she meant to, the easy confidence of his hands on the reins, the way he hummed old trail songs under his breath when he thought she was not listening. On the 3rd night, camped beneath a stand of mesquite with a small fire crackling between them, she finally asked the question that had been sitting on her tongue since Silver Bend. "Why did you leave the Rangers?" Benjamin poked at the fire with a stick, watching the sparks rise into the dark. For a long moment she thought he would not answer, but then he spoke, his voice low and rough at the edges. "There was a woman," he said. "Her name was Sarah. We were to be married in the spring of '76. I was out chasing a gang of rustlers along the border when word came that a fever had taken half the town where she lived, including her." He tossed the stick into the fire. "I kept riding after that, kept wearing the badge for another year, telling myself the work still mattered. But something in me had gone quiet, like a lamp with the wick turned too low. Eventually I turned in my badge and just started drifting, breaking horses, guiding folks through country they did not know. It is simpler work. Nobody dies on my account if I do it right." Eliza felt something in her chest tighten with recognition, the particular ache of grief that never fully leaves but simply learns to sit quietly in a person's bones. "I am sorry," she said. "That is a hard thing to carry." "We are both carrying something," he said, looking at her now with those tired, honest eyes. "Yours just happens to be buried under 6 feet of dirt in a dead man's grave." She almost laughed, surprised by the dark humor of it, and for the first time since her father's death she felt the strange, unfamiliar sensation of being understood by someone who was not family, someone who had chosen to sit beside her fire not out of obligation, but out of something closer to kinship. "Tell me about your father," Benjamin said after a while. And so she did, speaking long into the night about Thomas Shelton, about how he had built the ranch from nothing after coming west from Missouri, about how he used to sing to the cattle in a voice that could not carry a tune to save his life, about the particular way he had looked at her mother across a supper table even after 20 years of marriage, as though he were still a young man courting her for the first time. By the time she finished speaking, the fire had burned low, and Benjamin was watching her with an expression she could not quite name, something between admiration and a tenderness that seemed to surprise even him. "He sounds like he was a good man," Benjamin said quietly. "He was the best man I have ever known," Eliza said, and then, because the night and the fire and the strange intimacy of shared grief had loosened something in her, she added, "Until now, perhaps." She regretted the words the moment they left her mouth, certain they revealed too much too soon, but Benjamin did not laugh or turn away. He simply held her gaze across the dying fire, and something passed between them that neither of them was ready to name, and they sat together in that charged silence until sleep finally claimed them both. The fourth day brought trouble in the shape of dust on the horizon, 3 riders moving fast along their back trail, and Benjamin's easy manner vanished in an instant, replaced by the sharp alertness of a man who had once made his living reading danger before it arrived. "Get behind those rocks," he told her, already swinging down from his horse and pulling his rifle from its scabbard. "And keep that Colt of yours ready, even if you do not have to use it." "Who are they?" "I do not know yet. But nobody rides that hard across this country unless they are chasing something or someone." He crouched low against a boulder, watching the approaching dust. "Word may already be traveling about Malone's grave. Amos Kettle was dying, Eliza. Dying men talk to more than one person before the end." The riders drew closer, and Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs as she recognized, even from a distance, the particular swagger of men who rode with violence as a habit rather than a last resort. They pulled up perhaps 40 yards off, and the man in front, broad-shouldered and grizzled with a scar that pulled his left eye down at the corner, called out across the flat. "We are not looking for trouble," he shouted, though his hand rested easy on the pistol at his hip. "Just looking for the same thing you are, I expect." Amos Kettle talked to more than one caller before the good Lord took him. Benjamin's jaw tightened. "Cyrus Vance," he said under his breath, just loud enough for Eliza to hear. "Malone's old segundo. I should have guessed he would still be crawling around this territory. You know him. I know his kind. He will smile while he is deciding whether to shoot you." Benjamin raised his voice, calling back across the distance. "This is Shelton land business, Vance. Her father's gold, not yours." Cyrus Vance laughed, a dry, humorless sound that carried on the hot wind. Jesse Malone did not have kin to speak of, and dead men do not hold deeds. That gold belongs to whoever is standing over it when it comes out of the ground. Now, I would rather not spend lead on a woman and a washed-up ranger, but I will if you make me chase you all the way to Gallows Creek. For a long, tense moment nobody moved, the desert wind whistling low between the rocks, and Eliza's hand found the grip of her father's Colt, though she prayed she would not have to use it. Then Vance's horse shifted restlessly beneath him, and he seemed to reconsider the odds of the moment. 3 riders against 2 well-positioned targets with cover and clear lines of fire. "We will meet again before this is finished," Vance called out, wheeling his horse around. "Count on it." And with that, the 3 riders turned and rode off in a fresh cloud of dust, leaving Eliza's heart still hammering and Benjamin still crouched low with his rifle ready long after they had disappeared over the horizon. "They will follow us," Benjamin said finally, lowering his rifle. "Vance is not the sort to give up on $11,000 in gold that easily. We need to move faster than he expects, and we need to be smarter about it too. How do we do that?" He looked at her, something calculating and protective moving behind his eyes. "We stop following the main trail. There is a shorter way through Coyote Pass that most folks avoid because of the terrain, but it will save us the better part of a day, and it will put distance between us and Vance's men." He hesitated. "It is rough country, Eliza, rougher than anything you have ridden through. I need to know you can handle it." She thought of her mother waiting at the ranch, of the bank notice tucked in the drawer of her father's old desk, of Thomas Shelton's blood soaked into the Silver Bend Road 3 years past. "I can handle it," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Coyote Pass turned out to be a narrow, twisting cut through red rock canyons, where the trail sometimes disappeared entirely into loose scree, forcing them to lead the horses on foot along ledges barely wide enough for a boot. The heat in the canyon was worse than anywhere they had traveled, trapped between stone walls that radiated it back at them like the inside of an oven. And by the second hour, Eliza's shirt was soaked through with sweat and her legs trembled with the effort of the climb. It was on one such ledge, perhaps 2 hours into the pass, that the ground gave way beneath her boot. She felt herself falling before she even understood what was happening, the loose rock sliding out from under her, her stomach lurching as gravity took hold, and then a strong hand closed around her wrist and yanked her hard against solid stone, Benjamin's other arm wrapping around her waist to pull her fully back onto the ledge. For a moment they simply stood there chest to chest, both of them breathing hard, his heart hammering against her palm where it had landed against his shirt, and neither of them moved to step away. "I have got you," Benjamin said quietly, his voice rough with something that was not entirely relief. "I am not going to let anything happen to you, Eliza. Not out here. Not anywhere." She looked up at him, at the fine lines of worry etched around his eyes, at the way he was looking at her as though she were something precious he had almost lost, and she felt the last of her careful distance crumble away entirely. "Benjamin," she said softly, testing the shape of his name in a way she had not allowed herself before. He leaned down slowly, giving her every chance to pull away if she wished it, and when she did not, his lips found hers in a kiss that tasted of dust and desert heat and something far sweeter beneath it, something that felt dangerously close to hope. It was not a long kiss, but it was enough to leave them both a little breathless when they finally parted, foreheads still touching, the canyon walls rising red and silent around them. "I did not plan on that happening," Benjamin admitted, a rueful smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Neither did I," Eliza said, "but I find that I am not sorry it did." They stood like that a moment longer before the practical realities of their situation reasserted themselves, the horses shifting restlessly behind them, the sun sliding further toward the western ridge, and Cyrus Vance somewhere out there in the desert with 3 men, and a hunger for gold that did not belong to him. They continued through the pass in a new kind of silence, one charged with unspoken feeling rather than mere caution, and by the time they emerged onto the flat scrubland beyond, something fundamental had shifted between them, though neither one spoke of it directly again that day. That night, camped beneath a sky thick with more stars than Eliza had ever seen from the porch of the ranch house, Benjamin sat close beside her rather than across the fire as he had the previous nights, his shoulder brushing hers, and they talked long past the hour when sleep should have claimed them, about small things now, about horses they had loved and books they had read, and the particular color the desert turned at sunset. As though they were trying to learn every ordinary detail of each other before the danger ahead could take that chance away. "What will you do?" Benjamin asked eventually, "once you have the gold, after you have paid off the note and saved the ranch?" "I do not know," Eliza admitted. "I have thought of nothing else for 3 years but getting that gold back. I never let myself imagine what comes after." She glanced sideways at him, firelight dancing across the strong line of his jaw. "What about you? Will you keep drifting once this is done?" He was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a vulnerability she had not heard from him before. "I have been drifting for 3 years because I did not have anywhere I wanted to stay," he said. "That might be changing." She reached over and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his, and they sat together like that until the fire burned down to embers, saying nothing more because nothing more needed saying just then. They reached the outskirts of Gallows Creek on the 6th day of their journey, and Eliza felt her breath catch at the sight of it. The town had once been a modest but thriving mining camp, drawn up around a vein of silver that had played out nearly a decade before, and now it stood mostly abandoned, false-fronted buildings leaning at odd angles, their windows dark and broken, tumbleweeds gathered in drifts against porch steps that no one climbed anymore. A handful of stubborn residents remained, mostly old prospectors who had nowhere else to go, and a saloon keeper who served the few travelers who passed through. But the place had the hollow, echoing quality of a town that had already died and simply had not been buried yet. Boot Hill sat on a low rise at the edge of town, a scattering of wooden crosses and unmarked mounds where the mining camp had buried its dead over the years. Gamblers and gunfighters and men felled by fever or accident or simple bad luck. Amos Kettle's map, worn soft from handling, indicated a spot near the northern edge of the cemetery, beneath a leaning cross with no name carved into it, exactly the kind of anonymous grave a town would give to a man everyone knew was an outlaw but nobody wanted to claim. They arrived in the last hour of daylight, the sky bleeding orange and purple over the western ridges, and Eliza stood at the edge of the cemetery with the shovel in her hands, staring at the small, sunken mound that marked Jesse Malone's final resting place. "This is it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "After 3 years." Benjamin stood beside her, rifle slung over his shoulder, scanning the empty street behind them with the wariness of a man who had not forgotten Cyrus Vance's promise that they would meet again. "We should work quickly," he said. "I do not like how quiet this town feels. Vance could not be far behind us, not after we lost time in the canyon." Eliza nodded and drove the shovel into the loose, sandy soil, and Benjamin took up a second shovel he had purchased from the last trading post they passed, and together they began to dig in the fading light, working in silence broken only by the scrape of metal against earth and the distant, mournful call of a nighthawk somewhere out in the darkening desert. The digging was harder than Eliza had imagined, the soil packed tighter beneath the surface than it appeared, and her arms ached and her palms blistered inside her gloves before they had gone down even 3 feet. Benjamin worked steadily beside her, occasionally taking her shovel to spell her when her strength faltered, never once suggesting she step aside entirely, understanding somehow that she needed to be the one doing this, needed to feel the weight of the earth giving way beneath her own hands after 3 years of helplessness. They had gone perhaps 4 feet down when Benjamin's shovel struck something that was not simply dirt or bone, a hollow, metallic sound that made them both freeze in place. "Eliza," Benjamin said quietly, "I think we found it." They cleared the remaining soil with careful, almost reverent movements, and there, nestled just above what remained of Jesse Malone's coffin, sat a weathered strongbox, its iron corners rusted but its lock still intact. Eliza knelt in the loose dirt and ran her fingers over the box's surface, feeling 3 years of grief and fear and determination crest inside her chest like a wave. "That is my father's mark," she whispered, tracing the small brand burned into the wood, the same brand that marked every fence post and wagon on the Shelton ranch. "This is it, Benjamin. This is truly it." Benjamin knelt beside her and used the edge of his knife to pry at the rusted lock, working carefully until it finally gave way with a sharp crack, and when he lifted the lid, the last light of the setting sun caught the contents inside and set them ablaze with a dull golden fire, coins stacked and wrapped in oilcloth, exactly as Amos Kettle's letter had promised. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Eliza reached out and touched the coins with trembling fingers, and she felt the tears come before she could stop them. 3 years of grief finally finding release in that quiet, sacred moment beside her father's killer's grave. "He did not die for nothing," she said softly, more to herself than to Benjamin. "We are going to save the ranch, Papa. I am bringing it home." Benjamin placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, letting her have the moment, and it was only the sound of hoofbeats echoing up from the town below that shattered the stillness and brought them both sharply back to the present danger of their situation. "Riders," Benjamin said, already reaching for his rifle. "Coming fast." Eliza looked up to see 3 horsemen approaching through the deepening twilight, and even at a distance she recognized the broad-shouldered silhouette at the front of the group, the particular menace in the way he sat his horse. Cyrus Vance had found them. "Get behind the headstones," Benjamin said, already pulling the strongbox lid closed and dragging it back from the open grave. "We are not giving this up now, not after everything it took to get here." Eliza scrambled behind a cluster of weathered wooden crosses, her Colt drawn now, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat, while Benjamin took up position behind a low stone marker with his rifle braced and ready. Cyrus Vance and his 2 remaining riders pulled up at the edge of the cemetery, perhaps 30 yards distant, the fading light throwing long shadows across the graves between them. "I told you we would meet again," Vance called out, his voice carrying easily across the still evening air. "You have saved us the trouble of digging, I see. Much obliged for that." "This gold belongs to the Shelton family," Benjamin called back, his rifle steady despite the tension coiled in his shoulders. "It was stolen from her father and it is going home with her. You would do well to ride on, Vance, while you still can." Vance laughed, though there was no warmth in it. "There are 3 of us and 2 of you, Fairchild. I do not much like those odds if I were standing where you are standing." "There is exactly one of you willing to die for gold that is not yours," Benjamin said. "I know your kind, Vance. You have spent your whole life letting other men take the risks while you circle around behind and collect the spoils. Jesse Malone died broke and forgotten in an unmarked grave. Is that truly how you want your story to end too?" For a long moment, nobody moved, the tension stretching taut across the darkening cemetery, and Eliza held her breath behind the wooden cross, her finger resting light against the trigger of her father's Colt, praying she would not have to use it but ready to if it meant protecting Benjamin and bringing her father's gold home. Then one of Vance's men, younger than the others and clearly less committed to the cause, shifted uneasily in his saddle. "Cyrus, this does not sit right with me. Shooting a woman over gold that never was ours to begin with." "Shut your mouth," Vance snapped, but the moment of hesitation had already cracked something in the standoff, and Benjamin seized on it immediately. "Your own men are losing their taste for this," Benjamin called out. "Walk away now, Vance, and nobody has to die on account of a dead man's stolen gold. Keep pushing, and you will join Malone in the ground before the night is through." Vance's jaw worked silently for a moment, his eyes flicking between Benjamin's steady rifle and the uncertain postures of his own men, calculating odds that Eliza could see were no longer in his favor. Finally, with a curse that carried clear across the cemetery, he wheeled his horse around. "This is not finished, Fairchild," he called back, though the threat had lost most of its teeth. "Keep looking over your shoulder." "I have looked over my shoulder my whole life," Benjamin said quietly, though whether Vance heard the words as he rode off into the gathering dark, Eliza could not say. The 3 riders disappeared back toward the main trail, their hoofbeats fading into silence, and it was several long minutes before either Eliza or Benjamin dared to move from their positions among the graves. "Do you think he will truly leave it be?" Eliza asked, finally lowering her Colt with hands that shook from the release of tension. "Men like Vance do not change their nature," Benjamin said, helping her to her feet. "But he is a coward at heart for all his bluster. He will not risk his own skin against a rifle he knows is steady in someone's hands. We should move on tonight regardless. Put more distance between us before he works up the nerve to try something in the dark." They worked quickly to secure the strongbox to the pack mule, and within the hour they were riding away from Gallows Creek beneath a sky blazing with stars, the weight of the recovered gold a tangible, almost unbelievable presence behind them. Eliza kept glancing back at the pack mule as though the gold might vanish if she looked away too long, and Benjamin rode close beside her, his presence steady and reassuring in the vast darkness of the desert night. They made camp several miles outside the ghost town, in a small hollow shielded by rocks where a fire would not easily be seen from the trail, and once the horses were settled, and a modest fire crackled against the chill of the desert night. The full weight of what they had accomplished finally seemed to settle over both of them. "We did it," Eliza said, staring at the strongbox where it sat beside their bedrolls, still faintly glowing gold in the firelight when she lifted the lid to look inside once more. "After 3 years, Benjamin, we actually did it." "You did it," Benjamin corrected gently, settling down beside her. "I only came along to keep you from breaking your neck in Coyote Pass." She laughed, a real laugh, the first genuinely light sound she had made in longer than she could remember, and the sound of it seemed to please Benjamin more than any words of thanks could have. He reached over and took her hand, turning it gently to examine the blisters that had formed across her palm from the digging. "You are going to need to tend to these properly once we are home," he said, his thumb tracing gentle circles against her wrist. "Your mother will have my hide if I bring you back with hands like this." "My mother is going to love you," Eliza said, surprising herself with the certainty in her own voice. "She has been telling me for 2 years that I needed to stop grieving long enough to let someone in." Benjamin looked up at her, firelight catching the warmth in his eyes, and the teasing lightness between them shifted into something more serious, more tender. "And have you let me in, Eliza Shelton?" "I believe I have," she said softly. "Somewhere between Coyote Pass and Boot Hill, I believe you managed to work your way straight into my heart, Benjamin Fairchild." He reached up and brushed a strand of hair back from her face, his touch gentle despite the roughness of his hands, and he kissed her again there beneath the desert stars, slower and deeper than the hurried kiss in the canyon, a kiss that spoke of promises neither of them was yet ready to voice aloud, but both of them were beginning to feel with unshakable certainty. "I have not felt this way since Sarah," Benjamin admitted quietly when they finally parted, his forehead resting against hers. "I did not think I would feel it again. I am not sure what to do with it if I am honest." "You do not have to know what to do with it tonight," Eliza said. "We have a long ride home ahead of us yet. There is time to figure it out." They sat together beside the fire long into the night, and when sleep finally claimed them, they lay close beneath the same blanket, Benjamin's arm wrapped protectively around her, the strongbox of recovered gold resting safely between their bedrolls and the fire, guarded as much by the quiet devotion growing between them as by any weapon either of them carried. The journey home took 4 days, and though they remained watchful for any sign of Cyrus Vance or his men, the trail behind them stayed empty, and Eliza allowed herself to believe that the coward had truly given up the chase. The desert seemed gentler on the return journey, or perhaps it was simply that she now rode beside a man whose presence made the harshest country feel bearable, even beautiful in its own stark way. They talked constantly now, filling the miles with stories and dreams, and the particular kind of easy laughter that comes when two people have decided, without quite saying so aloud, that they intend to spend considerably more time in each other's company. On the 3rd night of the return journey, camped within sight of the distant lights of Silver Bend, Benjamin grew quiet in a way that made Eliza study him more closely across the fire. "What is troubling you?" she asked. He was turning something over in his hands, and when he finally held it up to the firelight, she saw it was a small, simple ring, clearly old, the gold band worn thin with age. "This was my mother's ring," he said. "I have carried it for years, through the Rangers, through losing Sarah, through all this drifting, telling myself I would know when the time was right to give it to someone. I did not expect to find that person guarding a dead outlaw's grave in the middle of the Arizona desert." He looked up at her, and for the first time since she had met him, she saw something like nervousness in his expression. "I know we have known each other only a handful of days, Eliza, and I know that is not near long enough by anyone's reasonable measure, but I have never in my life felt as certain of anything as I feel about wanting to build a future with you. I am not asking for an answer tonight. I only wanted you to know my intentions were serious, and my heart is entirely yours whenever you are ready to claim it." Eliza felt tears rise unbidden, Not from sadness this time, but from a fullness of feeling she had not expected to find on this journey, tangled up as it was with grief and gold and vengeance finally satisfied. She reached out and closed her hand gently around his, around the ring resting in his palm. "I do not need time to be certain, Benjamin," she said. "I have spent 3 years certain of only anger and loss. You have shown me these past days that my heart still has room for something better than that. I love you. I did not think it was possible to fall so completely for someone in so short a time, but I have, and I do not intend to waste another moment pretending otherwise." He slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that trembled slightly, and it fit as though it had been made for her all along. And beneath the vast desert sky, surrounded by silence and starlight and the promise of a home waiting just beyond the horizon, Benjamin Fairchild and Eliza Shelton sealed their future with a kiss that tasted of hope reclaimed from years of sorrow. They rode into Silver Bend the following afternoon, and word of their return spread through the small town faster than the desert wind, curious faces appearing in doorways and windows as they passed, drawn by the sight of the pack mule and the strongbox secured across its back. By the time they reached the edge of the Shelton ranch, Martha Shelton had already come running from the house, her apron still dusted with flour from the morning's baking, her weathered face streaked with tears before Eliza had even swung down from her horse. "You found it," Martha said, her voice breaking as she pulled her daughter into a fierce embrace. "You truly found it." "We found it together," Eliza said, glancing back at Benjamin, who stood holding the horses with an expression of quiet contentment on his face. "Mama, there is someone I would like you to meet properly." Martha Shelton looked between her daughter's shining eyes and the ring now visible on her finger, and a slow, knowing smile spread across her tired features. "I believe I already know exactly who this young man must be," she said, extending her hand toward Benjamin with genuine warmth. "Thank you for bringing my daughter home safely, Mr. Fairchild. It seems you have brought back a good deal more than I had hoped for." They opened the strongbox together on the kitchen table that evening, Martha's hands shaking as she counted the coins that would settle the note on the ranch with money left over besides, enough to see them through several lean seasons and repair the well that had run so dangerously low. There were tears and laughter mixed together around that table long into the night, and Eliza felt, for the first time in 3 long years, that the weight of grief that had settled over their household had finally begun to lift, replaced by something lighter and altogether more hopeful. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of practical matters, the note paid off at the bank in Silver Bend, the well repaired, new cattle purchased to replace those they had nearly lost to the drought and the debt. Benjamin stayed on at the Shelton Ranch, at first simply to help with the heavier work as the ranch recovered, but it became clear within a matter of days that his presence was no longer a temporary arrangement, but a permanent fixture that Martha herself seemed to welcome as readily as her daughter did. There remained, however, one piece of unfinished business that weighed on both their minds. Cyrus Vance had vanished after that tense standoff in the Gallows Creek Cemetery, but a man who had spent years chasing stolen gold did not simply disappear from memory, and Benjamin remained watchful in the weeks that followed, scanning the horizon whenever they rode out to check the herds, keeping his rifle close at hand even during the quiet routines of ranch life. The trouble finally came to a head on a warm evening some 3 weeks after their return, when a rider approached the ranch house at dusk, moving with a caution that immediately put Benjamin on alert. He stepped out onto the porch with his rifle in hand, Eliza close behind him with her father's Colt drawn, and they watched as the rider drew closer, resolving in the fading light into the unmistakable, scarred figure of Cyrus Vance himself, though he approached alone this time, his hands held carefully away from his weapon in a gesture of deliberate peace. "I'm not here for trouble," Vance called out as he reined in his horse a respectful distance from the porch. "You can lower that rifle, Fairchild. I have come to talk, not to fight. "You have some nerve showing your face here," Benjamin said, though he did lower the rifle slightly, watching Vance with careful suspicion. "My men left me after Gallows Creek," Vance said, and there was a tiredness in his voice that had not been there during their earlier confrontation, the tiredness of a man who had finally run out of road. "Said they wanted no part of chasing gold that clearly was not meant to be theirs. I have been riding alone since, thinking on things." He paused, glancing toward Eliza with something almost like shame crossing his weathered features. "I rode with Malone for 6 years, Miss Shelton. I was there the day he killed your father, though I want you to know I fired no shot that day myself. I have carried that weight longer than you might think, and chasing that gold was as much about proving to myself that something good could come from those years as it was about greed, though I will not pretend greed had no part in it." Eliza studied him carefully, searching for the deception she expected to find, but found instead only a weary, broken kind of honesty that she had not anticipated. "What is it you want, Mr. Vance?" "Nothing from you," he said quickly. "I do not deserve a cent of that gold, and I know it. I only wanted to say that I am done chasing what was never mine, and I am done with the life that led me to that cemetery in the first place. I am riding north, toward Oregon, where nobody knows my history, and I might yet make something honest of what remains of my life. I wanted you both to know you need not look over your shoulders on my account any longer." Benjamin lowered the rifle fully now, though his posture remained watchful. "That is a considerable change of heart, Vance. Watching a woman risk everything to reclaim what was stolen from her family," Vance said quietly, "and watching you stand ready to die defending her, over gold that was never once tempting enough to earn either of you turning against the other, that will change a man's thinking, if he still has any conscience left rattling around inside him." He touched the brim of his hat toward Eliza. "I am sorry for your father, Miss Shelton, truly sorry. I hope you find every happiness this life still owes you." And with that, he turned his horse and rode off into the deepening twilight, and neither Eliza nor Benjamin ever saw or heard from Cyrus Vance again, though word reached them nearly a year later through a passing drover that a man matching his description had taken up honest work on a timber crew somewhere in the Oregon Territory, seemingly determined to make good on his word. With that final shadow from the past finally lifted, Eliza and Benjamin were married that autumn, in a modest ceremony held in the yard of the Shelton Ranch beneath a sky painted gold and crimson by the setting sun. Martha Shelton wept through the entire ceremony, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief that had once belonged to Thomas Shelton, and the small gathering of neighbors and townsfolk who attended agreed afterward that they had rarely seen two people look so thoroughly, unshakably happy standing before a preacher. Eliza wore a simple dress of pale blue cotton that her mother had sewn for the occasion, and she carried a small bouquet of desert wildflowers that Benjamin himself had gathered that morning, riding out before dawn to find the best blooms he could locate in the surrounding hills. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Benjamin kissed her with such evident tenderness that even the most hardened ranch hands in attendance found themselves blinking back unexpected emotion. "I promised you a future the night I gave you that ring," Benjamin murmured against her ear as they danced together later that evening to the sound of a neighbor's fiddle, "and I intend to spend every day of my life making certain it is a good one." "You already have," Eliza whispered back, resting her head against his shoulder as they swayed beneath the lantern light strung between the porch posts. "You gave me back my father's memory with dignity, Benjamin. You gave me back hope when I had nearly forgotten what it felt like. Whatever future comes next, I know it will be good, simply because I get to face it beside you." The years that followed brought their own share of hardship, as ranch life in the territory always did. Seasons of drought and seasons of plenty, cattle lost to sickness and calves born healthy and strong. But through it all, Eliza and Benjamin faced each challenge together with the same steady partnership that had carried them across 90 miles of unforgiving desert and back again. Benjamin took naturally to ranch work, his years of tracking and reading the land serving him well as he and Eliza gradually expanded the herd beyond what even Thomas Shelton had once managed. And within a few years, the Shelton Ranch, which Benjamin insisted on keeping under that name in honor of the man whose memory had brought them together, had become one of the most respected operations in the territory. Martha Shelton lived to see 2 grandchildren born into that ranch house, a son first, whom they named Thomas after Eliza's father, born in the spring of 1881 with a shock of dark hair and his father's steady gray eyes, and a daughter 2 years later, whom they named Sarah, in quiet, loving tribute to the woman Benjamin had once loved and lost, a gesture that brought tears to Benjamin's eyes when Eliza first suggested it, and one he never forgot to thank her for in all the years that followed. The old strongbox that had once held Jesse Malone's stolen gold found a new purpose in those years as well. Rather than melting down entirely into cattle and repairs and the ordinary business of building a life, Eliza insisted that a portion of the gold be set aside permanently, kept in that same weathered box, now cleaned and repaired, and displayed in a place of quiet honor in the ranch house parlor, a reminder to their children and to themselves of everything that had been lost and everything that had ultimately been reclaimed through courage and love. On quiet evenings, when the ranch work was finished and the children had finally been coaxed to sleep, Eliza and Benjamin would sit together on the porch where she had first read Amos Kettle's fateful letter, watching the sun set over land that was truly, finally theirs, free of debt and shadowed no longer by grief or vengeance unfulfilled. Eliza would often find herself tracing the worn gold band on her finger, the same ring Benjamin had offered her beneath desert stars all those years before, and she would think of how strange and wonderful it was that her father's death, and the theft that had followed it, had eventually led her not only to justice, but to a love she had never expected to find, forged in danger and tempered by devotion, until it had become the truest, steadiest thing in her entire life. "Do you ever think about that grave?" she asked him once, years later, as they watched their children chase fireflies across the yard in the fading summer light. "About what we found there?" Benjamin considered the question for a long moment, his arm settled comfortably around her shoulders as it had been on so many evenings since. "I think about it sometimes," he admitted. "Mostly I think about how strange it is that a man who caused so much grief ended up, without ever intending it, being the reason I found you. I do not forgive him for what he did to your father, Eliza. I never will. But I suppose even the darkest chapters can lead somewhere unexpected if a person is brave enough to walk through them rather than around." "I was not brave," Eliza said softly. "I was desperate and angry, and I did not know what else to do but ride out into that desert and dig until I found some kind of answer. That is precisely what bravery looks like, most days," Benjamin said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "It rarely feels like courage while you are living it. It only looks that way afterward, once you have survived it and found something worth the cost on the other side." She smiled at that, watching young Thomas scoop up his little sister and swing her in a wide circle while she squealed with delighted laughter, the golden Arizona evening settling soft and warm around the family that had grown from grief and gold and unexpected love. And Eliza Shelton Fairchild knew, with the same unshakable certainty she had felt that night beneath the desert stars, that she had found something infinitely more valuable than anything that had ever been buried beneath Jesse Malone's lonely, unmarked grave. She had found a home. She had found a partner whose steady heart matched her own in courage and tenderness alike. And in the years that stretched out ahead of them, filled with the ordinary, precious business of raising children and tending land and growing old together beneath the wide Arizona sky, she found, again and again, that the greatest treasure of that long desert journey had never truly been the gold at all. It had been Benjamin, riding beside her every step of the way, and the love that had grown, unexpected and unstoppable, between two people who had both once believed their hearts were too broken to ever be whole again.